To be honest, I'm exhausted. I'm extremely tired. I've been offline intentionally for the past week or so, trying to regain some sense of peace after months of COVID scares and weeks of protests. The through line I've noticed for this entire experience has been consistent. Black people are under attack, physiologically and in outright acts of violence. And the simple fact is this: despite the reality that this country was literally built on the backs of Black people and progressed through the experimentation on Black people, we collectively have nothing to show for it. We don't have generational wealth accumulation for the most part because of racist practices like redlining and situations like the Tulsa Massacre. And as we very well know, there have been no plans for sweeping reparations, only doubtful whispers. So we're only halfway through 2020, and this year has already been described as one of the most momentous of our lifetime. This is a time to address the missteps of this country. This is a time to get rid of the triggering reminders, the Confederate statues, the plantations, the offensive team names. This is a time to stare our history in the eye and finally overcome it.
Quite simply, here in America, I believe statues of Black Civil War veterans and statues of white Confederate soldiers should be side by side facing each other because that is true history. Our Black history has been whitewashed by communists. The history is never taught in schools because it doesn't fit the narratives of the mainstreams, North versus South. The young Black men of the Civil War that escaped slavery and the Democrats' Black laws were able to own guns and fight for their freedom. Confederates and Robert E. Lee statues should not be torn down. None of our shared history should be hidden or replaced, no matter how good or bad it is. No city or state should tear down one group's statues just because someone's feelings are hurt. We should, however, build statues in order to tell the complete story. All Americans should love history. Black history should not be left out, and white history, American history, should not be destroyed or silenced. We are one America with all of our history, good and bad. And once you take away history, it's out of mind, out of sight, out of mind, and then you can also rewrite history.
Hello, I'm David Grasso, and you're watching Bold TV. Today's burning question: does the United States need to move on from the past? Let's hear from our panelists. First, we have Kiana Fitzgerald. She's a music journalist and cultural critic. And joining her is Jarome Bell. He's a candidate for Congress in Virginia's 2nd District. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So, Kiana, do we have to move past and rename everything, all our landmarks, et cetera? Some of us have seen the maps of all the Confederate statues everywhere, et cetera, et cetera. Do you feel like it's time to move on from that?
In certain aspects, I do believe that we have to move forward, but that, I feel, is not the focus at this moment. The focus is Black people are fighting for their rights in their lives. That's the central crux of what the protests are about, the riots are about. I think that's something that we should focus in on instead of saying, oh, let's, rename Confederate statues or tear them down or what have you. That is pacifying people, I think. That's not really getting to the internal issue of we need rights. We don't want to die for simply being Black.
So, Jarome, you're running for Congress in a place that is, of course, Southern. It was part of the Confederacy. How do you feel about this issue?
Well, the way I feel about the issue is that Black people, we actually do have rights. I think the protests are more of Antifa type people, more communist people, really trying to pit a race war of Black and white people. I'm running in a district that's predominantly white. Most of my donors are predominantly white. So I don't feel that there's a race issue, as some would say, as far as racism. I think there's an ideological issue that we may have in the United States. And I agree with Kiana. The removal of the statues and tearing down the statues will not solve the problem. What I understand, because I grew up, of course, Black. I grew up in Cleveland, Ohio. I grew up poor. And what I do understand is that to solve our problems, Black people can no longer reach out to other races or reach out to other people. We have to solve our own problems. We've been trying to get the Democratic Party and the Republican Party on our side to correct our issues. But we need to correct our own issues internally. The only people that can solve our problems are us.
Yeah, what do you think about that, Kiana?
I respectfully disagree. I feel that the issues that have been placed upon Black people to fight against are not our fault. We haven't done anything. All we've done is exist. And I feel like Toni Morrison said in an interview, before she passed, there is an issue with the way that white people approach Black history and Black culture. This isn't a Black issue. This is an issue outside of us, an issue that is surrounding everything that envelops what it is to be Black. I feel as though, it's just a little bit dangerous to say, we need to fix our own problem, because we've been trying to do that. There have been protests and riots since, before I was born, way before I was born. I'm 30 years old. And, I also, I grew up in Texas. I grew up poor as well. And I have seen firsthand what it's like to want to pull yourself up by your own bootstraps, but you don't have access to certain funding. You don't have access to certain, things that would help to elevate your life just because you're raised in a certain area or you're a certain skin tone. So yes, I feel like there are certain things that can be done in order to elevate Black people within our own community, but we have to have help. We can't just sit here and do it ourselves.
Yeah, so you both disagree on this issue, right? What do you think the Black community needs to do, fitting into the narrative that you've put forward, to go ahead and improve, conditions in Black communities across the country?
Well, yeah, I coach high school football. I'm going to use this as an example in the inner city. Okay, and I mentor Black young men in the inner city. And one of my things is we can't make excuses. OK, I have a doctor. My oldest son is a medical doctor. OK, and so I never allowed him to make any excuses for why he could not get something done or why he could not become the doctor that he wanted to be. So I think a lot of times in the communities we have excuses a little more than I would like. Yes. Do we need help? Yeah, sometimes financially, yes. But what we need to understand is that as Black people, we really need to get together. We don't trust each other. OK, and for example, OK, we have the highest abortion and I call it extermination rate in our neighborhoods. We need to get together and get out the extermination mills out of our neighborhoods. We need to clean up our neighborhoods by getting rid of the alcohol stores that's on every corner. We need to get rid of the drugs in our neighborhood. And we know who the drug dealers are. We know who the bad people are. And we also need to bring in our own businesses. And when we do have a Black business in our neighborhoods, we need to support that business and keep that wealth into the neighborhood. And also in our schools, we need to bring in skills trades. Everyone's not going to go to college and everyone's not going to be a doctor. I understand that. But a lot of Black people, a lot of Black young men and women, they can definitely use their hands because we've done it for centuries. And so if we bring those skills and those traits back into the Black neighborhood and bring in entrepreneurship programs into our neighborhood and bring in more mentoring programs and bring in programs how to handle money, how to be financially stable. So we can do this. We have financial bankers. We have planning managers. We have bricklayers. So we have to reach out to those in our own community, and we need to start our own organizations to build up our community. And we used to own banks. We used to have our own banks. I think there's maybe one or two Black-owned banks. So we need to do that and go and get loans from our own banks if we can't get it from outside. But there are opportunities out there for the Black community. We just need to, like I say, maybe assist each other a little more, trust each other a little more, and get it done within our communities.
Kiana, what do you think the barriers are to this self-sufficiency narrative that, your counterpart is pushing here?
I think that there are still exclusionary practices going on. They may be not as obvious, but I think that there are people in positions of power, as we see, with the quote unquote Karens that are going on. They're kind of being exposed as being in these high leadership areas and working in companies that definitely deal with Black people, and they, show their true colors in situations where they're faced in an area where they feel like someone shouldn't be there. So I feel like there are obstacles that are outside of our control, but for the most part, I just I want to speak to Jarome's point about, we need to build our own.
Yeah, please, by all means, go ahead.
Yeah. So I just want to quickly bring up the Tulsa massacre that already happened. We were in the process of building our own communities and our own systems and our own banking and financial institutions. And to be frank, white people came in and they destroyed all of that because they didn't want to see black people have wealth. That was a long time ago, but a lot of those people who experienced that, a lot of people who have experienced lynchings back in the day are still alive. And I feel like that is the barrier, that institutionalized mindset of like, we have to continue this tradition of being racist and being exclusionary because that's what made our country great. I feel like that's an issue.
So, what's funny, this whole interview and this whole debate changed. So you guys don't feel that, canceling Aunt Jemima and Uncle Ben's and, getting rid of Splash Mountain at Disney and Cops the TV show and Paw Patrol and Looney Tunes is doing anything to solve any of the problems we've been talking about?
No, I think that's a facade, and that's just a feel-good, like you say, a Band-Aid. But I want to touch on one point about the Tulsa Black Wall Street that she mentioned. Tulsa Black Wall Street, it was a terrible massacre, and it was devastating to that community of Tulsa, and yes, of some black wealth. But Tulsa was not the only Black Wall Street in America at that time. Right here where I live in Virginia, and in Richmond, it's called Jackson Ward. That was actually one of the biggest Black Wall Streets in the nation. We had 12 Black Wall Streets at that time. What actually took away Black Wall Streets was in 1972 was the New Deal. The New Deal came in and it gave minimum wage, mandatory minimum wage, mandatory taxation, and it brought in triple taxation on these businesses to where black business owners were actually put out of business by the Democrat Party and by the New Deal brought on by President Johnson.
Jarome, we're running out of time here. Kiana, can you respond to that briefly? A lot of times, government programs that are well-meaning, tend to reduce employment, make conditions more difficult in historically black communities. Do you feel like government has all the answers for a lot of the problems in your community?
I feel like we ultimately will have to rely on the government in order to see systemic change. So I feel like, we in some respects, we can mobilize ourselves and have grassroots movements and do what we need to do to do as much as we can on our level. But ultimately, the government is what governs our society.
Great. Well, I really appreciate you both being so civil and creating a dialogue. These are issues that we need to unpack these days. So thank you so much for being here.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Kiana. It was nice talking to you.
You too, Jarome.
See, we can all be friends. Thank you all for watching. Have a great day.